Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, so you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few points to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed to the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, as always, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Members, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 29th, 2020, the committee is meeting today to continue its study on the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses and introduce each and every one of them to you. We have with us Heather Whiteside, the Associate Professor, Political Science, University of Waterloo. We're going to start off with you, Heather, for your 5 minutes, followed by the Canadian Construction Association, Mary Van Buren, President, the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, Tabitha Bull, President and Chief Executive Officer, the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, Mark Romoff, President and Chief Executive Officer, Efficiency Canada, Brendan Haley, Policy Director, and Martin Limas, Vice President, Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Institute of Canada, as well as Government and Stakeholder Relations. Ms. Whiteside, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks very much for inviting me here today to comment on the mandate, activities, projects, and financing of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I've noted the types of witnesses that you've spoken to thus far, the advocate, the critic, the defenders. And I'm sure my answers will make clear where I fit here too. I've certainly published a few things that have been quite critical of what the CIB might be. And I say might because it hasn't done much yet. And I remain very concerned about particular possibilities like asset recycling, which hopefully we can discuss more in the Q&A. But since not much has happened yet with the CIB, I think we're actually in quite a great spot to do something different, to actually build back better in a meaningful sense. So before turning it over to your questions and to the other witnesses, who I'm sure we represent very diverse views on the subject, I'd like to establish 7 foundational premises that I hope we can all agree on across the partisan divide. 1, public infrastructure is important, generally, but also in particular priority areas, and this has been all the more heightened by the pandemic. 2, public infrastructure is needed. There is an infrastructure gap in this country, with much at the end of its life cycle or inadequate for meeting modern needs. 3, public infrastructure is services. Hospitals are healthcare, transit is urban planning, schools are education. Public infrastructure serves a public good and is a public asset in more ways than one. 4, there are several ways to finance public infrastructure, but only a few ways of funding it, namely through Canadians as taxpayers and service users. 5, there is no financing crisis in Canada. Our pension funds are well capitalized, the bond markets are friendly towards all levels of government, and many of our crown corporations are already self-financing. 6, some forms of finance are preferable over others. Canadians' pooled savings and crown corporations should be investing in our public infrastructure, not Wall Street hedge funds looking for P3 equity ownership. And 7, commercialized public infrastructure offering private equity isn't the solution to the infrastructure gap that we face. User fees are often insufficient to repay capital costs. Mega projects often remain reliant on public grants and subsidies, and private equity gives unaccountable entities ownership rights over vital public services. So with these 7 points in mind, I think it's plain that the CIB's link to private equity and commercialized infrastructure undermines other key parts of its mandate, like operating in the public interest. So we do not need to give away ownership rights to achieve our infrastructure aims. A few months ago, the new CIB CEO promised P3 enthusiasts, quote, in the future, the CIB will be more active in soliciting partnerships rather than waiting for offers, that he'll, quote, start with the market and work backwards. What is he talking about here? He's actually referring to reversing the procurement relationship, shifting from the question what's needed in Canadian communities to what's wanted by global investors. This is not only a dangerous position that aligns infrastructure decisions with dogma rather than merit, it also directly contradicts what Minister McKenna said to this committee just 2 weeks ago, that the CIB would develop projects within priority areas, quote, for the public good, and that, quote, it isn't about privatizing infrastructure. For the Bloc, the CIB's commercialized mandate intrudes on provincial decision making. For the NDP and Greens, the CIB threatens progressive values. For the Liberals, the CIB presents deep contradictions. And for the Conservatives, it violates their 2016 party position. As MP Polyev wrote in 2017 in a Maclean's op-ed, with the CIB, quote, powerful financial interests get the rewards and taxpayers get the risk. We need the CIB to do better than this. We need a knowledge bank pooling talent. We need a source of very low cost public financing. And we need an ex post evaluator, an entity that evaluates projects during operational and long run multi decade phases. We need an entity that values public assets above all and is guided by a public sector ethos. Amend, as those French speaking members will certainly know, means to make better. Building Back Better requires amending the Canada Infrastructure Bank mandate, unshackling it from private equity and commercialization so that it can make good on its commitments to operate for the public good, to provide infrastructure for Indigenous and rural populations, to help with a green transition, and to support local needs, as I'm sure we'll hear about from the other witnesses as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whiteside. We're now going to move on to our next witness, Ms. Van Buren. Ms. Van Buren, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm speaking on behalf of the Canadian Construction Association's 20,000 member firms who operate across Canada as general contractors, trade contractors, the civil and professional and manufacturers and suppliers who work obviously in the commercial side, institutional, industrial sector. One of the key messages that we're bringing today is the importance of infrastructure in not only building for our future, but certainly in addressing the deficit that we know about. In 2019, we produced an infrastructure report that showed the very worrisome state in many of our assets across Canada. And looking at the future, of course, we see that the pandemic does bring us an opportunity to build back differently. And one of the key areas of concern is, of course, workforce. And the construction industry, we need a workforce, and we can hire and train many of those people who have been displaced in other sectors. And we can do that in a way that gives them great, meaningful jobs. But building for our future, building for the infrastructure deficit requires a 25-year plan. The Investing in Canada plan with its 12-year commitment is a great start, but it's not enough. And we have to all urgently focus on getting those funds flowing today. There's no point in having billions of dollars if they sit unallocated and not being used. In terms of the infrastructure bank, just a bit of context. We know Canada is a large landmass. We know that we have a small population. We have very ambitious goals to be, the best country and remain the best country in the world. But we are not alone in that. Australia, the UK, the US, they're facing many of the same challenges that we are. They don't have enough workforce. They don't have enough capital to make these projects go forward. And we're all facing in Canada some protectionism trade winds, looking at the US by US program, and even within some provinces, we've seen some trade barriers crop up. So
Ms. Van Buren,
yes?
If I may, I'm sorry. Can you, any chance we can get that mic closer to your mouth? The interpreters are having a tough time hearing you.
Yeah, there you go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So our contractors are concerned that Canada won't be as attractive to this capital that we need. and to have that investor confidence to keep our country moving forward. So certainly Crown corporations like EDC are very helpful, and we believe that the Canada Infrastructure Bank can also play a pivotal role. However, its mandate is a promise, but it's not yet realized. And certainly we've met with the leadership on many occasions. P3 models can be very useful, but it's a model that does need some rethinking. We need to make sure that Canadian companies can compete without taking a disproportionate share of the risk. And certainly, we're looking forward to many of the infrastructure bank's announcements and how they can help um, certainly be a catalyst for more investment in Canada. And we need these projects again to start now. So we've seen the bank have a bit of a slow start, but we're certainly counting on them picking up the pace and making a real contribution to the country. So another role for them would be in helping with productivity gains, de-risking innovation, making sure that that's part of the criteria when they're looking at the projects. I guess in summary, certainly one of the goals with the we share with Canadians and all parliamentarians is including more Canadians in economic recovery. Infrastructure is a natural fit. Every community in Canada needs something, whether that's a community center, it's a hospital, they need their curbs, they need their roads fixed. So again, we can come up with economic stimulus that ensures that it's shared across Canada, large, small communities, and all sizes of business. So we are happy to work with the government, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Ms. Van Buren. We're now going to move on to Mr. Romoff. Mr. Romoff, you have the floor for 5 minutes. You're on mute. It happens.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No
I'm
problem.
so excited to start talking. I didn't get my act together. So thank you again, Mr. Chair,
No
and
problem.
members of the committee for inviting the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships to contribute to the study that the committee is undertaking of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I know the committee is aware that Canada, like all countries around the world, is confronting a significant infrastructure deficit while facing the additional challenge of fiscal restraint. Despite this reality, it is absolutely critical to invest in infrastructure because it is well known that these investments drive economic growth and prosperity, create jobs, increase productivity, and promote global competitiveness, outcomes that couldn't be more timely and more relevant as governments focus on post-pandemic economic recovery. The Council commends the federal government, provinces, territories, and municipalities for stepping up to the plate, earmarking significant funding to address this issue. Notably, the federal government set the bar, as you know, with its $186 billion Investing in Canada plan, and together with other creative vehicles such as the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the Smart Cities Challenge, is moving Canada's innovation and economic yardsticks forward. Our council is a national not-for-profit member-based organization consisting of nearly 350 public and private sector organizations, which work closely with all levels of government, Indigenous communities, and the private sector to enable them to become smarter, more innovative, and more effective at delivering sustainable infrastructure in Canada. I should add that the council is not a lobby group. Rather, we partner with governments to achieve the very best performance and return on their infrastructure investments while enhancing the quality of life of Canadians. And while we are proponents of public-private partnerships or P3s, we also recognize that they are not a panacea. But if used for the right reasons and on the right projects, P3s have delivered very strong economic outcomes in terms of projects being delivered on time, in fact, 13% faster than traditionally procured projects, and on budget, with savings to governments exceeding $27 billion. Clearly excellent value for taxpayers. We now have 290 projects across the country and across a wide range of industry sectors, and the value of these projects that have reached financial close today now exceeds $140 billion. It's important to note, though, that P3s are not privatization. In every instance, governments retain ownership, control, and accountability for these projects that they've invested in. It's important to remember that P3 is simply a procurement model, nothing more. Today's unprecedented challenges, the reality of climate change, cybersecurity threats, and now the COVID-19 pandemic, demand unprecedented action. The Canada Infrastructure Bank, under its new leadership, its $10 billion growth plan, a new unsolicited proposals framework, and an updated statement of priorities and accountabilities, is well positioned to play a central role in the government's economic recovery plan, and the Council is eager to support the bank to enable it to be successful. In particular, we commend the recent direction that the CIB established a target of $1 billion for Indigenous projects. This is an important and timely step to address the serious infrastructure deficit that these communities are confronting, estimated to be anywhere between $25 billion and $30 billion. Indigenous peoples are also keenly interested in participating in major infrastructure projects. The Cleacho All Seasons Road project in the Northwest Territories is an outstanding example of one of the first P3s in North America with an Indigenous cash-funded 20% equity stake. In reality, however, access to capital at competitive rates for Indigenous communities is a major hurdle, and the CIB has a unique opportunity to step in and redress this inequity. The bank can also make an important contribution to strengthening municipal project procurement and delivery. Municipalities account for the vast majority of infrastructure throughout the country and will be lead players in delivering stimulus projects. At the same time, complex infrastructure issues often challenge local government officials. The CIB has the expertise and specialized knowledge that can prove invaluable to advancing and completing these infrastructure projects. I would say, Mr. Chair, Canada has become a globally recognized hub for infrastructure development and in particular for public-private partnerships. We have earned a reputation around the world for being best in class with an approach and achievements that are the envy of many countries. My council believes that over the coming months, as the CIB delivers on its ambitious agenda, it too will be seen to be best in its class. I'd be pleased to elaborate on the points I've made and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Romoff. We're now going to move on to Mr. Haley. Mr. Haley, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I'm the Policy Director for Efficiency Canada. We're a research and advocacy organization based at Carleton University, focused on creating an energy efficient economy. So I'd like to start by inviting you to think about energy efficiency as infrastructure that we need to move to a net zero emissions economy. So we usually think about energy efficiency on a building by building basis. We leave the financing and the project management of retrofits to a building owner, right? But in a net zero economy, we're really concerned with the large scale, aggregate impacts of improving energy efficiency. So that includes GHG emission reductions from buildings directly, as well as freeing up some of our existing clean electricity resources that can be used for further reductions in areas like transportation and industry. So to reach the scale of energy retrofits we need to create a functioning market for deep energy savings. And that's where customers can access stable bills, comfort, indoor air quality benefits that can come with energy efficiency in the same way that they can pay for a cell phone plan right now or pay for a lease on a car. And the convenience on the customer end exists in those areas because you have private investors partly that are ready to back particular business models and ready to buy portfolios of smaller loans. So today, private investors are not directing their capital towards substantial energy upgrades because we've not created the necessary market structures, right? Investors see high transaction costs for each retrofit project, and they do not have the data to accurately assess investment risk. So the Canada Infrastructure Bank can take on what I'd call a market creating mission, right? With a goal to direct capital into building retrofits as a new area for productive investments. And strategies it could follow include, number one, taking the lead on investments and then producing data to demonstrate the potential to the private sector. Aggregating individual retrofit projects into larger portfolios that can then attract the attention of investors, and promoting standardized energy savings measurement and evaluation protocols that can reduce transaction costs and perhaps enable trade. So the CIB growth plan announced at the end of 2020 includes building retrofits for the first time, with a focus on large scale non-residential buildings. And I think that is the market most prepared to demonstrate the investment opportunity. However, to reach our climate goals, we also need to make energy efficiency services available in the places people live. In the government's currently announced or proposed policies in other areas we look at it, financing for homeowners is either planned to be attached to the individual themselves or perhaps to the home itself. Yet in other jurisdictions, they're exploring the aggregation of residential retrofits to achieve economies of scale, as well as different business models where homeowners can essentially sign a contract that guarantees home comfort and a stable bill with a third party handling the financing. So to really see residential retrofits take off, I think we need to develop these new market structures and these new business models. And this will require more than just redirecting financial markets providing finance. It'll require on the ground market development, new innovations in areas such as manufacturing, logistics. But if we can develop more market-ready residential retrofit solutions, the Canada Infrastructure Bank should be ready to provide that long-term patient capital. Thus, the suggestion I'd make to you today is that the Government of Canada could initiate a residential building retrofit strategy that encourages new business models, new economies of scale to create the conditions for Canada Infrastructure Bank investment. And that complementary policy, I think, would fill a gap, and it would help maximize the impact of the Canada Infrastructure Bank going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Haley. We're now going to move on to Mr. Limas. Mr. Limas, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. As you all have been told, commercial and residential buildings account collectively for 18% of greenhouse gas emissions in our country. There are many important ways that the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning and refrigeration industry can and will aid in meeting emission reduction targets. Some of them obvious, others less so. In principle, we support the notion of investing in energy efficiency as infrastructure, as submitted by our friend at Efficiency Canada. Indeed, our industry's contribution to reducing energy use is primarily through building by building upgrades in technologies or processes that reduce carbon emissions and energy demand at point of use, thus freeing supply capacity for other uses. Some technologies, however, create very specific benefits to the larger energy system and specifically to Canada's electricity infrastructure. And they should be considered as a form of infrastructure investment because of these benefits. Today, I'd like to direct your attention to one such example just to make the point. And the technology in question is ground source heat pumps or geo-exchange systems. As you will know, a key tactic for decarbonizing space heating in homes and buildings is to convert carbon-based heating systems to electric heat pumps, while at the same time transitioning electricity production to clean sources. As an end-use technology, heat pumps of all types present a remarkable technology that instead of burning fuel to create thermal energy, uses a bit of electricity to move or pump thermal energy from one place to another. The thermal energy in question might be available in the air, water, ground, or even in municipal waste systems. Because of the wonders of the refrigeration cycle and the laws of thermodynamics, these systems can deliver energy efficiencies far greater, even 3.5 to 5 times greater than the 100% efficiency of traditional baseboard electric resistance heaters. But there is a challenge to this. Like other jurisdictions, Canada's electricity grid and power supply capacity is not designed to meet average demand over the span of a day or a year. It must be capable of meeting peak demand on any given day. And in Canada, energy demand for home heating will, of course, peak on the coldest days of winter. Currently, the most readily available and affordable type of heat pump is an air source heat pump, and these have legitimately become popular in many parts of the country. Super efficient and able to cool and heat when and as needed. What's not to like? However, because they rely on the thermal energy available in outdoor air, even the best cold climate air source heat pumps drop in energy performance on the coldest days of the year, exactly when they're most needed, down to just a little better than electric resistance heat. This means potentially large spikes in demand for electricity across vast areas of the country will occur during these periods. For grid planners, the idea of replacing carbon-based fuels with electric modes of heating has created legitimate worries about the system capacity needed to meet those short-term but substantial demand spikes in winter. Some studies have suggested that because of these spikes, a transition to all electric heating forms will be very costly, requiring investments of up to $1.4 trillion in new power generation and distribution infrastructure over the next 30 years. But these studies do not make any distinction among the different heat pump technologies available on the market and how their performance varies under extreme conditions. A recent study commissioned by HRAI highlights the unique advantages of ground source heat pumps or geo-exchange systems to managing the electricity system. The study found that if the heating of homes and buildings across Canada were electrified using ground source rather than air source heat pumps, Canada would save up to $495 billion in grid development costs over the next 30 years. This amounts to a net savings to the grid of more than $40,000 for every Canadian household, and that's after allowing for the cost of installing these relatively more expensive systems. The study highlights a unique and underappreciated benefit of ground source systems, namely their ability to perform at consistently high energy efficiencies regardless of outdoor air temperatures, due to their reliance on more stable thermal energy stored in the ground. Even on the coldest days of winter, these systems perform at efficiencies of 350% or higher. Rolled out at scale, geo-exchange systems could be used to substantially reduce those winter peaks in demand that would otherwise stress the system. Our study quantifies the system-wide infrastructure benefits of this technology, demonstrating that avoided electricity system development cost will more than pay for the investment in these heating systems by users. In classic tragedy of the commons fashion, however, Canadians acting on in their own short-term interests will be disinclined to shoulder the higher upfront costs of these systems, despite the fact that societal system-wide benefits would significantly exceed their individual cost burden. We will need thoughtful policy measures and programs to reconcile these gaps. Public investment in the electricity generation and distribution infrastructure needed to power a transition to a low carbon economy must also include consideration of energy utilization technologies that result in such significant avoided system costs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Limas. We're now going to move into our first round of questioning. We're going to start off with the Conservatives, Mr. Scheer for 6 minutes, followed by Mr. Alcuri. For the Liberals for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Sure, yeah.
We only have Ms. Bull presenting yet.
Mr. Bull or Ms. Bull?
Ms.
No, Ms.
Bull.
Bull. Yeah.
Let me just check my list here. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed Ms. Bull. I'm sorry, Ms. Bull. I apologize. Ms. Bull, go ahead. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Miigwech. Ani, Tabitha Dignakas, Nipissing Dijnaba, Mijasido Dem. As President CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and all the distinguished members of the committee for the opportunity to provide you with my testimony and answer any questions. Speaking to you from my home office, I acknowledge the land as the traditional territory of many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. As the federal government continues to tackle a national infrastructure gap noted as potentially as high as $570 billion, a portion of that funding needs to be dedicated to support Indigenous infrastructure, where this gap is most acute. As reported by the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships in 2016, First Nation peoples face an infrastructure deficit of as much as $30 billion. The infrastructure gap facing Inuit and Métis peoples has not been accurately quantified, but it is estimated to at least match the deficit of First Nations. We must be mindful about what this means for Indigenous peoples. United Nations Human Development Index, Indigenous Services Canada recently found that while Canada ranked 12th internationally in 2016, the on-reserve Indigenous population ranked 78th, the same as that of a developing country. Furthermore, CCAB's research has repeatedly found that the lack of appropriate and reliable infrastructure is a barrier to Indigenous business growth, including reliable internet, transportation, such as roads and airports, electricity, and clean water. CCAB's report Promise and Prosperity found that 4 in 10 Indigenous peoples either have no internet connection or a connection of which they cannot fully rely. These problems are more common for Indigenous businesses located on reserve and in remote areas. The impact of this deficit was highlighted by the OECD, which noted that this lack of reliable internet makes it more difficult for Indigenous entrepreneurs in remote and rural communities to access business training skills programs. While free online business skills training is widely available, poor internet connectivity hinders its use. Additionally, infrastructure issues for Indigenous people are exacerbated by climate change, as Indigenous people in Canada experience warming rates at 2 to 3 times the world's average. So what is the solution? First, infrastructure spending within Indigenous communities needs to be driven by the needs articulated by Indigenous communities and leaders and support building institutional infrastructure that empowers Indigenous peoples and businesses. CCAB data indicates that most Indigenous communities are building capacity to service their own infrastructure needs. In fact, in 2018, approximately 75% of Aboriginal Economic Development Corporations reported that they have the capacity to take on the work if the federal government put forward contracts to address infrastructure priorities in their communities. This is why CCAB supports, in part, the establishment of the First Nations Infrastructure Institute. Next, there is a need for predictable and sustained funding so that Indigenous communities can reliably plan and successfully maintain their community infrastructure. All levels of government must align funding to reduce duplication and close the gaps. However, successful execution cannot be done without the private sector. Sustainable solutions must leverage capital markets. Although the need is much greater, solutions like those proposed through the direction to the Canadian Infrastructure Bank to invest at least $1 billion in revenue generating projects that benefit Indigenous communities can help close the infrastructure gap. The inclusivity of CIB, of their management of risk and willingness to pursue creative financial structures can help build out vital Indigenous infrastructure. Additionally, CIB instills the confidence needed in project financing to help dispel myths of Indigenous investment risk, which should facilitate greater investment by private sector developers in future projects. CCAB commends the CIB on the expansion of its advisory and investment team to include Indigenous expertise and the appointment of Ms. Kimberly Baird, an Indigenous leader, to its board of directors. Projects such as the Cadillac Hydro Fiber Link, which will see the construction of a new 1,200 kilometer, 150 megawatt transmission line to Nunavut from Manitoba, will bring renewable, reliable electricity and broadband connectivity to communities and industry for the first time, which is crucial for advancing the economy. While the scale of the deficit is daunting, narrowing the deficit is not insurmountable. Infrastructure development in our communities requires patient capital, private sector investment, and development expertise in partnership with Indigenous peoples and businesses. Just like for all Canadians, when businesses are thriving, communities thrive. The difference is that Indigenous communities have been historically underserved, under-resourced, and systemically kept out of the Canadian economy. So they have further to go to reach the same levels of well-being and wealth as non-Indigenous communities. CCAB is committed to continuing to work in collaboration with the government, our members, and partners to help rebuild and strengthen the path towards reconciliation and a healthy and prosperous Canada. Thank you for your time. Miigwech.
Thank you, Ms. Bo Miigwech, and to all presenters, all of you, great job. Got some great points out there, and we're going to have some great questions, I'm sure. So we'll start off with our first round, 6 minutes each. Conservatives are going to be led by Mr. Scheer, followed by the Liberals with Mr. Alcuri, the Bloc with Mr. Barcelou-Duval, and the NDP with Mr. Backrack. Mr. Scheer, you got the floor for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. A lot of great topics covered, and unfortunately, we probably won't have time to go into depth in everything you've raised, but hopefully we can unpack a little bit of some of the points that you brought up. I just wanted to give Ms. Whiteside an opportunity because she had flagged it as a topic that she was hoping that she could get into a little bit more explanation of during the Q&A. You mentioned that one of the things that you were concerned about, one of the things you wanted to talk a little bit more about was the concept of asset recycling. And so I just maybe would give this opportunity to you to explore that a little bit more with the committee.
Ms. Whiteside.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'll just read from my notes a little bit just to make sure I get the timeline right. So in terms of what is asset recycling, just in case you're unfamiliar with it, basically it can involve several things. Mainly, it refers to disposing of so-called legacy assets in order to raise revenue that's needed for additional infrastructure. Okay, so maybe in and of itself, that's not anything particularly new or unique, but it then tends to take two forms, and one applies more to Canada than the other. One form is like just kind of straight up asset monetization, which usually occurs in, let's say, fiscally distressed circumstances, cities like Chicago or Detroit, that basically sort of scan their public portfolios and turn things like revenue from public parking meters, public parking lots, that type of thing, into streams of kind of investable funds that then they take those lump sum payments that they receive from private investors and try to pay down debt, reclaim some kind of investment grade um, uh, interest rate, but or credit rating, pardon me, to get a better interest rate. But the form of asset recycling that might apply more readily in Canada, and this is where I just want to refer to my notes to remind myself of the timeline, is one that it appears the Liberals had looked into and are probably following off of the Australian model, where basically assets, profitable or potentially profitable public sector assets, are disposed of to private investors in order to generate the revenue that's needed to fund new P3 infrastructure. In the case of Australia, it's actually, there's a fiscal carrot that's sort of provided by the Commonwealth or the federal government there. If their states dispose of legacy assets and use that money to develop P3s, the central government, the Commonwealth government, will give them 15% on top of that. And in Canada, it looks like in 2016, the federal government hired various, let's say, bankers or aspects of kind of global finance to look into whether they could or would or should maybe engage in asset recycling in terms of privatizing federal port assets and privatizing airports. And I don't know exactly what happened to that. You guys would be in a better position than me to figure that out. But it does look like that's on hiatus for now, at least. I know there was some dissent, at least within the kind of the airport, like the federal boards that oversee airports. Some were maybe more for this option, some weren't. In any case, this remains a concern for me. I hope for Canadians in general, I would assume so. Because essentially what it does is in exchange for lump sum upfront remuneration, it gives up, it cedes control rights, decision making over really important assets, ports, airports, this sort of thing. In the case of Chicago and Detroit, parking meters, that type of thing. So it does that, and then it tethers the use of those funds to P3. So it's kind of like a double whammy. And I mean, the Canada Infrastructure Bank purports that it's evidence-based, and these types of policy maneuvers aren't necessarily seeking out, evidence-based solutions. They kind of start with a presumption, or it's like a solution in search of a problem. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just maybe one very quick follow-up. When this type of option is pursued by governments, are these assets relinquished in perpetuity? Is it usually for like a 25-year cycle, or what kind of timelines are usually involved?
Yeah, thanks. So it does depend. Typically, like in the case of some of these distressed cities that I was mentioning, it could be 99 years, it could be 50 years. These are typically, though, agreements that take place over the course of, multiple generations. So effectively in perpetuity, I haven't seen an example where it's fully relinquished, though, but like 99 years is not uncommon.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that clarification. I wanted to also ask Ms. Van Buren a question about, from her perspective, the issue of lapsed funds. I think you flagged in your comments that that the dollar amounts that this government uses to announce are often not in line with the yearly spending. So can you maybe speak to that a little bit about what your stakeholders, what your the people that you work with are seeing on that, and if you have any idea as to the cause of that, what are the barriers? We hear a lot from municipalities that applications are sitting on desks and money's not getting out the door, shovels aren't getting in the ground. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Ms. Van Buren?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the question. The Government of Canada has a great resource, the Infrastructure Progress Tracker, and you can see province by province how the funds are or aren't flowing. And it's pretty dismal right now. If you look at provinces like Ontario, there's something like $8 billion that still hasn't flown from 2018 commitments. BC is also very much underserved, most of Atlantic Canada. Alberta is actually one of the better ones at maybe 80 to 90% of the commitments. So, where's the blockage? Well, what we are hearing is that the aspirations of the federal government and the way the buckets are designed are not flexible, necessarily meet the needs of the communities. Ms. Bowl talked about, what are the needs of the communities? That should be the driving force, and then the infrastructure flows. And that's one of the issues that we're seeing is that, in some provinces, Saskatchewan or let's say Kelowna, you just don't need mass transit. So that funding cannot be spent because it just doesn't make sense for those communities, but they might need curbs, they might need community centers. So those are some of the reasons where we're seeing some blockages.
Thank you, Ms. Van Buren. Thank you, Mr. Scheer. We're now going to move on to Mr. Alkuri. Mr. Alkuri, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all our witnesses. My first question is addressed to all the witnesses, and whoever wants to answer, you're free to do so. During the last elections, our Mr. Scheer and his Conservative colleagues claimed $18 billion in infrastructure cuts. Now, I find that shocking, given that we live in a country with an infrastructure deficit that is quite huge. So I have a question for all our witnesses. It is so important during this very difficult period where we're dealing with a pandemic and an economic crisis. Do you think that working Canadians and families can afford these types of cuts?
In there?
So
Mr. Rumoff, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very good question. And as I mentioned in my own comments at the outset, that despite the fiscal challenges that the country is facing, and the fact that it may be more difficult to, in fact, dedicate the kinds of funds necessary for infrastructure, making those investments are absolutely critical. I mean, we have demonstrated evidence that infrastructure investment truly does drive economic growth. It creates jobs, it makes communities more competitive, and overall Canada will be globally competitive and play on the world stage. It is a leader now on infrastructure investment in terms of the amount and nature of the investment and the models that are used. And as I mentioned earlier, we are the envy of many countries around the world who are faced with exactly the same kinds of issues. So I am a strong proponent of continuing investment in infrastructure, well targeted, in order to get the economic outputs we're looking for. I would be less a fan of shovel ready and focus on shovel smart. So from my perspective, you want to invest in infrastructure that is in fact going to be able to drive true economic outcomes.
Thank you, Mr. Rumoff. Mr. Alkuri.
And my last question is addressed to Mr. Limas. It's quite clear that we're living a pandemic and economic crisis. We're also dealing with a climate crisis, and we need to deploy efforts to protect our lifestyle. And not so long ago, the CIB published its growth plan, which is focused on key aspects: public transit, clean power, green infrastructure. Could you talk to us about the role that the CIB could play to make Canada more efficient as well as stimulate its economy and create decent jobs for Canadians?
Carry. Mr. Limas?
Well, first, as was suggested by the representative of the Canadian Construction Association, investing in work on buildings, on infrastructure is a job stimulus type of initiative, which we strongly support. The jobs in our sector are high quality, well paid jobs, and it's a very, I think, a very effective and very intelligent strategy for stimulating the economy. In terms of investing in addressing carbon emissions, as I said in my submission, there are many ways that that can be addressed on the utilization side. We can eliminate forms of heating that rely on carbon fuels in favor of electrified systems. And at the same time, there's needed investment in decarbonization of the electricity grid itself. So investing in low carbon uses in buildings only makes sense if we at the same time decarbonize power generation. And that requires a long-term strategy. I think it ought to be a central part of the infrastructure plan, and it appears to be. So we strongly support that approach.
Thank you, Mr. Limas, and thank you, Mr. El-Khoury. We're now going to move on to the block. Mr. Barceau-Duval, the floor is yours for 6 minutes. I don't think Mr. Barceau-Duval's mic is working. Mr. Barceau-Duval, your mic is not working. I don't see you on mute. You have your mic plugged in?
Est-ce que ça fonctionne
There you
maintenant?
go.
Is it working now? Yes. My first question is for Ms. Van Buren. I hope I haven't mispronounced your name, and I apologize if I have. My question for you is that earlier in your opening statement, you referred to unused funds and that money not being useful, and you have questions about that. Could you please clarify what your concern is, but especially in the context of the CIB having problems putting in place projects? Is that a concern for you?
Ms. Van Buren?
Thank you for the question, but I will respond in English.
Thank you very much for the question. So the overall, as I mentioned, the Invest in Canada program is falling behind on the deployment of the funds. Why that matters is that the construction industry, it's inefficient when we go into boom and bust. So if there's all of a sudden a whole bunch of funds that flows, your costs go up, we don't have the workers, it's very inefficient.
Ms. Van Buren? I'm sorry, I apologize. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, if the flow of funding is consistent and predictable, then construction firms have more confidence. They will hire, they will train, they will have apprentices. So it's very important that this flow of funds continue. Not to mention that the reason the funds are there is to invest in the communities that very much need that infrastructure. The infrastructure bank is in a similar situation. I believe they had something like $35 billion that they were set up with a few years ago, and not very much of that money has flown. So our hope is that they will, with this new leadership team, start to get those projects flowing. The other part of it is it takes a while to tender, go through the RFPs, to choose your suppliers, and to just start the program of the build. That can take 2 to 3 years or more on these mega projects. So it's really important that the bank be very clear in its direction and start moving so that the infrastructure can be built.
Merci.
Thank you. What we've noted in recent years with this government is a sort of hesitation, or with the government seems to not quite know where it's going. It announces a program and then it changes its mind, announces something different, and creates uncertainty and instability. My understanding of what you've said is this could negatively affect the industry because what you need is predictability in the long term. Can you comment?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that's why we're looking for a 25-year commitment to infrastructure investment. So again, the businesses could invest not just in their workforce, but also innovation. A question was asked earlier about productivity. And one of the challenges the industry has is that the low-cost bid is often chosen, and most of the risk falls on the contractor. So if the role of the infrastructure bank can play much stronger in supporting innovation, then we can also increase productivity.
Mr. Brasseur-Duval.
Merci.
Thank you. You also talked about the importance for businesses to succeed, and I'm thinking of certain contracts. For example, the Champlain Bridge, which was awarded in 3PP, and to a Spanish consortium. And you see also the REM train cars that are manufactured in India. They could have been manufactured here at home. So how could we make sure that our companies are advantaged so that taxpayers get a better deal?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the CCA is very much holds free trade as a policy, and certainly we advocate for that, and we appreciate all the government's efforts on all the tariffs that have happened over the last few years. In terms of, we just want a fair level playing field for Canadians. And sometimes one of the issues is that the project is just too risky for Canadian contractors. They won't take it on, and yet it still gets tendered, and other countries may be supported by their governments to help de-risk some of that, or they, for whatever reason, they're willing to take that risk. And so part of that is making sure that those contracts are fair for Canadian contractors, and the contractor in Canada is not expected to take an undue risk.
Mr. Brasseur-Duval, time for a quick question.
Thank you. In regard to the fair level playing field, I don't know if you have any examples in mind, but I'm concerned that when the projects are delivered, it's not always a good quality, and we don't have much recourse when it comes to foreign companies.
Ms. Van Buren.
Well, the contracts, if you're talking about federal contracts, those are managed by the federal government, and they have many great project managers. They certainly oversee the projects. So in terms of international litigation, that's certainly beyond my area of expertise.
Thank you, Mr. Brasseur-Duval, and thank you, Ms. Van Buren. We're now going to move on to the NDP. Mr. Bachrach, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing today. Ms. Whiteside, rather, your testimony was very interesting, and you touched on a lot of aspects that I would like to ask you questions about. But first, over the course of this study, we have heard proponents of P3s suggest that they are more likely to come in on or under budget and ahead of the timeline. And we've had some critics suggest that there's evidence to the contrary. And I believe it was Mr. Romoff who laid out some of those points. I wonder if you could take a few minutes to provide your perspective on what he laid out in terms of the advantages of P3s and what your research has found in that regard.
Ms. Whiteside.
Sure, thank you. I have a lot to say about that. I'll just try to make it brief. I have spent about, over 10 years researching on this and publishing on this. So I think I would just say, again, trying to keep it brief, that I don't necessarily dispute the fact that P3s come in on time, on budget, though of course there are many exceptions to that, particularly P3s that were developed in the 90s and 2000s for various reasons. And I'll just leave it at that. But the central dispute that I would have with that argument is that it presumes that traditional design build and other forms of traditional contracting cannot actually perform in that same way. And auditors general, including in Ontario, but in countries around the world, have just simply refuted that argument. Of course, traditional and other forms of contracting can ensure timely delivery that's on budget. So I think for that reason alone, it's presented as if P3s are the only solution when in fact there's a kind of wide range of procurement forms. And there are a lot of other costs that are associated with P3s. So the argument that P3s deliver value for money is not necessarily the same as saying that they're cheaper. And if you look at the methodology manual of Infrastructure Ontario, for instance, it makes clear that base project costs for P3s or alternative financing and procurement or whatever they're calling it these days, base costs for traditional versus AFP or P3 are lower. And that has to do with lower financing costs and other aspects like that. So this is where it starts to get complicated, and maybe I'll just leave it at that. But I'll just say, I mean, a lot of this argument around the P3 superiority rests on the idea of risk transfer, which in fact we pay for through higher risk premiums that are applied to P3 infrastructure versus traditional.
Mr. Bachrach?
So,
Thank you, Ms. Whiteside. Picking up on that, we've heard at previous meetings people suggest that the CIB model is going to differ substantially from the P3 model of the past. And that I think we heard the parliamentary secretary at a previous meeting suggest that, well, those P3s from previous years, you know, we made a lot of mistakes, we've improved them a lot. Today's P3s are markedly different. Could you speak to that? Is the performance of these P3 projects better than it has been in the past, or are some of the problems that you've identified still with us today?
Ms. Whiteside?
well, thank you for that. I think what's happened is over time we see that, and you know, so scholars kind of debate: is it 2 waves? Is it 3 waves? But let's just say it's 2 waves of P3. So there were ones that were developed in the 90s and kind of early 2000s that I think by any measure were well, a lot of them were quite a disaster, and it had to do with, you know, trying to achieve off-book financing, which is illusory, or perhaps trying to offload too much risk, as the conservatives in the UK found with their PFI model before 1997, and issues like that. And so what happened was the P3 model became more tailored to what's needed by P3 investors. There's a kind of sweet spot around what size these projects are in terms of dollar amount, capital costs, and then the length of the operations or maintenance component, how much risk is exactly transferred, what types of risks. I mean, these are commercially bearable risks. These aren't any uncertainty that might come up. So the model was sort of refined over time, and now we have P3 screens at the provincial level, and there's this kind of routine development that's proceeded with essentially most or all capital projects in this kind of certain range. So just so whether that means they're actually better over time or not, I mean, I would argue that they aren't. That essentially what's happened is it's kind of created a routine condition where P3s are the norm, rather than actually establishing what was particularly wrong in the public sector in the first place, and that could have been ameliorated in other ways. I would just like to speak quickly about what you said about the CIB. I mean, so I opened in my statement with saying, you know, it hasn't done much. So just looking through the 13 projects that were announced, I mean, over half are in the MOU stage. A couple are basically providing low-cost financing. Some are advisory services. I don't know what the CIB is gonna be. I thought I knew in kind of 2015, 2016, but it's not clear. I mean, what they've talked about is what I mentioned: kind of commercialized projects, bringing in global capital, this kind of thing. That sounds like a P3 to me. So it remains to be seen.
Question, Mr. Bachrach?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and my apologies, Dr. Whiteside, for not using your proper title at the beginning. Picking up on that, one of the things we've heard from many people over the course of this study is this idea that we can't solve the infrastructure crisis without bringing in private capital, that there simply isn't enough public money available to meet the needs of communities and the needs of infrastructure in this country. It seemed from your introduction that you don't believe that that's the case. I wonder if you could expand a bit on why that might be.
Dr. Whiteside?
Thank you. And no problem. Thanks for saying doctor, but it's also professor, so I go by that. Thank you, though. Yeah, in terms of other forms of financing, I mean, I look to like what is EDC doing? What is BDC doing? They're floating bonds. We bought a very expensive pipeline that way. So there's bonds that are an option or debt, let's say, which is why in my comments I focused on equity, which is, I think, fairly different. What really distinguishes P3s from other ways of financing public infrastructure is that it actually offers these equity stakes or ownership stakes in these projects versus floating bonds, let's say. In the US, they use revenue bonds where they link repayment to, say, the tolls that are on highways, this kind of thing, without a P3 model. We also have these, fairly well capitalized, very well capitalized rather, pension funds that could be enticed maybe to buy into bonds as they used to. I mean, this is how a lot of the infrastructure was financed in Canada for a very long time. Yeah, and we could follow those kind of models. There's also the Canada Lands Company, which has its own difficulties, but it does its financing for its real estate ventures through, say, commercial operations like the CN Tower and whatnot. So there's a lot of models that actually already exist in the public sector.
Thank you, Dr. Whiteside. Mr. Bachrach, thank you as well. We're now going to move on to our second round for 5 minutes each. Ms. Cusi of the Conservatives, Ms. Jacek of the Liberals, followed by 2.5 minutes by Mr. Bruslew of the Bloc, and 2.5 minutes by Mr. Bachrach of the NDP. Ms. Cusi, floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for not doing the sound test prior due to technical difficulties. So if my sound is uncomfortable for anyone, please, clerk, do let me know. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start with Ms. Van Buren, please. Ms. Van Buren, I've noticed, or it's my personal perception when I look at the project list for the CIB, it seems to have sort of two objectives. The first one is sort of based on a narrow ideological agenda of the government and to sort of push forward projects with this narrow ideological agenda to infrastructure within Canada rather than sort of having a more global, holistic view of the true infrastructure which is required and putting our resources towards that. The other piece to me seems to be some type of political balance that this infrastructure bank is supposed to play, despite the comments from the government that this entity and the government are not one and the same. They are different. But I use as an example, in the last meeting, I brought up a lot of protests about the Alberta irrigation project with this government has gone on quite extensively. Because to me, it seems to be a small favor sort of as an exchange or something that is supposed to make us as Albertans, since I am an MP from Alberta, forget about what I believe is the complete destruction of our natural resources sector by this government, which I brought up to the infrastructure minister in our last meeting. So it would seem to me that the bulk of these projects sort of fall into one of those two categories, either some ideological base or the other being some type of political currency. So just in your estimate, sort of depoliticizing this question, but getting your sincere response, how do you and your organization perceive the selection process for deciding whether or not to invest in an infrastructure project? And perhaps I'll follow up on that with, do you think the process needs to be more independent from the government? But perhaps more widely, you could just comment on the selection process for projects, please, and your perception of it.
Ms. Van Buren.
Again, it's very early days with the bank, and I think maybe they had a bit of conflict in finding their footing in this new space, which is natural in a new institution. There were already a lot of players, and what role could they play? And I think we've placed quite a bit of expectation on them, given the infrastructure deficit. In our view, their role is to attract capital and to help de-risk projects, and that's where they need to be. There's no shortage of good projects to fund. I know people get into the debate of shovel-worthy, shovel-ready, and in our view, there are plenty of shovel-ready projects. that need to be funded. So in terms of the criteria, I think we should be looking at, again, what are the needs of the municipalities, of the provinces? How can those be better aligned with the aspirations of the federal government? And the infrastructure bank can play a role where they can de-risk or attract some of that capital.
Ms. Kusi?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, Ms. Van Buren, I do believe that you are correct in terms of evaluating the shovel ready versus shovel worthy. And I have heard many concerns from some of my transport counterparts from across the country in terms of the government being effective in distributing these funds, not only for infrastructure bank projects, but for other projects as well. I use, for example, the Eglinton East LRT system, which awaits the distribution of federal funds for these projects. So I certainly have concerns about the funding being distributed. But of course, important when you mention shovel ready is the timing. And so, as we look into the future, do you think any of these projects which have been put forward will be completed within a reasonable time frame? Because certainly in putting out these funds, we would hope to get some type of usable, functional infrastructure within a foreseeable period. Do you anticipate this?
Ms. Van Buren?
If we look at all the projects that are being funded under the Invest in Canada plan, some are very small, 35,000 up to big ones. So yes, the work is getting done as it's being tendered, and contractors are moving on it. Again, the barrier seems to be more in moving it from the federal to the provincial to the municipalities. And again, we're encouraging dialogue. Let's have some flexibility. We appreciate that there's the triple bottom line lens, but we're in the middle of a pandemic and a recession, and we need to get these projects moving and people working.
Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Van Buren, and thank you, Ms. Kusi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Van Buren.
We're now going to move on to Ms. Jacek. Ms. Jacek, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all the witnesses. Yet again, a fascinating discussion. I'd like to follow up on where Mr. Bachrach was going in his questions to Professor Whiteside. So perhaps I'll ask Mr. Romoff. You heard Professor Whiteside saying that there were all sorts of other ways of financing worthy projects other than using the private sector capital. How do you respond to that? What about more government debt? What about bonds, etc.? Do you think that some projects would not be able to proceed if it were not for the private capital?
Mr. Romoff?
Thank you very much for that question. I would say, first of all, that there is lots of private capital around. As Mary Van Buren mentioned, there is capital available, there are projects available. The challenge here is, in fact, to ensure, and this is really where the bank can play a significant role, to ensure that large, complex, revenue risk projects can be brought successfully to market. And this is an area where private capital has been somewhat reluctant because there is revenue risk attached to these projects. So we're talking maybe about toll roads, even water, wastewater projects, anything that has a revenue element to it, because there's a risk attached to that. And so the real benefit of the bank engaging in these projects is, in fact, to help de-risk those projects, to make it more attractive to private capital, to partner with them in order to enable these larger, more complex projects to come to market. So that's a very significant piece of the equation. And, there was also reference made to some of the criticisms of P3 projects coming from Ontario's Auditor General. You may recall, and I know Professor Whiteside will recall, an earlier report by the Ontario AG, where she claimed that these projects were costing the province $8 billion. But you have to read her narrative very carefully, because what she actually said was that that money could have been saved if governments were able to deliver infrastructure projects themselves on time and on budget. And that's the challenge. Governments have demonstrated time and again, and it's not unique to Canada. This is a classic phenomenon around the world, that projects that are undertaken through traditional procurement, if they were delivered on time and on budget, then we wouldn't need P3s. But the reality is, and you see projects all around you, anywhere across Canada, where projects are way behind schedule and way over budget. And that's why you need to bring a discipline to the procurement process and to the delivery process in order to get the very best return on your and my tax dollars that are being invested in these projects. So that's really a critical element in this equation.
Ms. Jessic?
Thank you. Um, the issue of public ownership, once the asset has been constructed, surely there is a way, because I think I, like most people, would feel that these projects should remain in public hands in terms of the asset that is built. Surely there's a way of constructing the whole P3 in a way that, in a relatively short period of time or from the word go, the asset remains in public hands. I know that Minister McKenna said to us that there was no mandate in the Canada Infrastructure Bank to actually pursue privatization in terms of ownership. So how do you look at that?
Mr. Romoff?
Thank you. Again, a couple of points here. We need to remember that when we talk about the Canada Infrastructure Bank, it is not a procurement agency. It does not decide on the model to be used, whether it's P3 or another approach to delivering on infrastructure projects. They are simply there to partner with other entities to enable the financing necessary to bring these projects to market. So we need to understand that there's lots of confusion about whether the bank is a P3 agency or is going to only pursue P3 projects. They're agnostic around model and should be. Their mandate is to make sure that they're providing financing in order to get the very best outcomes on the projects that they're pursuing. And that's really critical. And if left to that mandate, I think you'll see that they can be a very effective tool in the government's toolkit to bring more and more projects successfully to the marketplace.
Thank you, Mr. Romoff, and thank you, Ms. Jessic. We're now going to move on to Mr. Barceau-Duval for 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the opening statement, Mr. Romoff said something that really interested me. He mentioned that the P3s, public-private partnerships, are not necessarily privatization. If Ms. Whiteside would be able to comment on that statement to tell us to what extent that might be true or not, I would appreciate that.
Ms. Whiteside?
Yeah, this is really, this is maybe in a sense an age-old debate. To some extent, in academia anyway, to some extent it depends on how you define privatization, and I'm sorry to give that kind of answer. But okay, so which parts of the P3 are private? Well, the land remains public most often in Canada. I think every case that I've ever looked at, the land remains a public asset. And no, it's not the infrastructure that's built isn't outright sold. It's always structured as a lease, as far as I'm aware of. These lease terms, though, vary from maybe 25 years, 30 years, and up. So at least a generation. And in terms of the financing, one thing I'd just like to respond to a question that was raised earlier is like this notion of, can the public take on debt, or should we be using P3 financing? Well, the P3 is a long run obligation of the government, precisely because it is owned by the government and structured as a lease. And within the P3 financing itself, typically 70% is debt finance and 30% is equity finance. So if all those things are equal, essentially what becomes different or privatization about a P3 is this equity portion. So it's that the private partner has ownership stakes, rights, decision-making, and control over the aspects of the project agreement divvies out to them. So in the case of a hospital in Canada, this is typically, well, it varies, but this can be anything other than clinical care. That's a wide range of services and maintenance and other kinds of forms of decision making. So, I mean, is it privatization? Isn't it? It certainly involves the privatization of decision making, depending on the particular project, and that equity portion is central to that.
Thank you, Ms. Whiteside, and thank you, Mr. Barsu-Devel. We're now going to move on to Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And with apologies to the witnesses, I'd like to take a brief moment to move the motion that I provided notice of. And so if you will allow me, I believe this is a time-sensitive and pressing matter, particularly due to the concerns being felt in the region I represent. The motion reads that the committee hold a minimum of 1 meeting to study the follow-up audit on rail safety, that the Auditor General of Canada be invited to appear for the first hour, that the Minister of Transport be invited for a second hour, and that this meeting occur no later than the 25th of March 2021. And I believe members of the committee have translated versions of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Do we have any questions or comments on this motion, members? Any questions or comments? With none, Mr. Clerk, we will proceed with a vote.
Okay, Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Fillmore.
Chair, I wonder if before we go to the vote, if the mover of the motion could just discuss the intention behind it for a moment, please.
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fillmore, for the opportunity. So a little over a week ago, the Auditor General released a report that raised some very troubling concerns about rail safety in Canada. In particular, the fact that the recommendations from the 2013 audit on rail safety had not all been implemented. This follows on the footsteps of the Environment Commissioner releasing a very similar report in which the Environment Commissioner was quoted as saying, quote, "The window for a recurrence of a Lac-Mégantic type disaster is still open." Now, I live in a region where the volume of dangerous goods being transported by rail is projected to increase dramatically. It has already increased. Communities are worried about the risks that rail transport poses for community safety, for the environment, and they want assurances that Canada's regulatory system and the oversight provided by Transport Canada is up to the task of protecting communities and the environment. And that's why I bring this forward. The trains are running through Northwest BC every single day at all times of day, and people deserve to know that they're being kept safe. So I would love to have the Auditor General and the Minister at committee to provide more information on this very concerning report.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach, and thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Any further comments? Do the Conservatives or the Bloc have any questions? No? Mr. Sidhu, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe a study occurred in the last mandate as well. I think there's another committee studying the rail safety issue. It's important for myself and I know for the government. I'm just wondering, the minister did appear on February 18th. There's a deadline set on this motion by no later than March 25th. I don't know. Before we go to that, we should check with the minister's schedule to make sure, there's nothing that can, stop him from coming here. I know he's going to be coming to speak to us on the main estimates as well. So maybe we can add something into that meeting as well. So just some thoughts. I don't know what, my fellow colleagues think of that.
Thank you, Mr. Sidhu. Further comments? Mr. Fillmore?
I wonder if Mr. Bachrach would consent to just removing the deadline in the motion, the part that says, and that this meeting occurred no later than March 25th, 2021. We don't want to pass a motion at our committee that will simply be frustrated and then fail because of the minister's schedule or other exigencies. So, I think we could probably find some hospitality to it if we could just remove the deadline.
Mr. Bachrach?
I appreciate the sentiment and certainly recognize that the minister has a very busy schedule. We have had these conversations, these type of discussions at this committee before about the minister's schedule, and I believe that what we agreed to in the past was that we would leave the date in the motion, and that if the minister was absolutely not able to make it by that date, the date is a fair ways off at the end of the month, that that it could be brought back to the committee and the committee could consider an alternate proposal from the minister. My concern with leaving it open is that given how busy everyone's schedules are, that this priority, which is really a pressing priority for communities in the region I represent, that this will simply drift into the future and won't get the attention and scrutiny that it deserves.
If I may as well, I'll just add to the conversation that this is being studied at the Public Accounts Committee.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, Taylor, if it would be prudent to wait to see what comes out of that committee and then just kind of go from there. I don't know. I'll throw that out there for discussion as well. Andy or Mr. Fillmore, you have the floor.
I was going to say the exact same thing. It's a public accounts now, and why don't we just let them do their work, and then we can build on that and respond to it. The minister did, of course, just appear at the end of February, and we'd now be asking her to appear again at the end of March in a busy budget season. I just don't want the will of the committee as expressed by motion to be frustrated by her not being able to show up. Also, the fact that it's being studied right now at public accounts would lead me to, again, propose an amendment that we remove the deadline.
Okay, before I go to that, I go to Ms. Jacek. Ms. Jacek?
Yes, I just wanted to add that the minister will be appearing for the main estimates, and perhaps it might be useful to just add this issue to that appearance. So I just also think that we have so many studies on our list that we've kind of agreed to, and if it's going to be studied at public accounts, it also seems a bit redundant to duplicate their effort. So again, if the date is removed, I think it gives a lot more flexibility.
Thank you, Ms. Jacek. Mr. Bachrach?
So I appreciate all the concerns that are being expressed, and you know, my sense of urgency certainly remains on this. I'm not sure what the plans of the Public Accounts Committee are, but this is an area that falls squarely within the jurisdiction of the Minister of Transport. This is, after all, the Transport Committee, and it feels very germane and pertinent to our purpose as a committee, and is a timely and pressing issue. So I'll certainly follow the other committees' work closely. However, I do think that it behooves us to hear from the Minister and the Auditor General on this topic as soon as possible. And again, I would welcome a counter proposal from the Minister should his timeline not allow for an appearance prior to March 25th. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Members, any further comments or questions? With that, Mr. Clerk, if you can read out the motion, please.
Actually, I believe Mr. Sidhu had his hand up.
Oh, I see. Mr. Sidhu, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that, Mr. Chair. No, we've got a couple. I think we've got 2 reports going on, and we've got rural infrastructure study coming up next. And you know, there's so many important issues across the country, and I think we got to be mindful to each and every member. This, you know, as my colleague mentioned, this is already being studied in public account. Safety is paramount, so it is being studied. So I don't know if we want to duplicate that, but I do know that the committee has a lot of important business as well to tackle. So I'm not sure if the Conservative Party wants to weigh in here, or the Bloc, because we do know there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline here.
Further questions or comments? Mr. Fillmore?
Thank you. I appreciate all the thoughtful commentary here. Again, I'd hate for Mr. Bachrach's motion to fail. I think that he would find that it could pass if we could remove the deadline and perhaps append his question to the appearance of the minister to discuss the main estimates. With that amendment, I think he would find support.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Questions or comments further? We have Ms. Kusi, Mr. Alkuri. Ms. Kusi, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. In conversations with Mr. Backrack since the beginning of my time as Vice Chair of this committee, I know that rail safety has been of great importance to him. And I feel, along with the study of rail safety, this ties very closely to the evaluation of other forms of transport alternatives for rail safety, which to our party would include pipelines. And my previous motion, unfortunately, was defeated to further study one pipeline, which is currently facing challenges within Canada. So, I certainly can understand the concerns that we have many other studies going on, as well as the minister coming for, or we hope with my notice of motion, of course, that we will ask the minister to come for the main estimates. There never seems to be enough time to cover everything. And just given Mr. Backrack's long-standing interest in this and my interest in it for comparatives for how to best measure the transport of goods across our nation and to get our resources to market and to do that so safely. We support Mr. Backrack's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kusi. Mr. Alkuri, then Mr. Barcelona-Vel. Mr. Alkuri, go ahead.
Actually, a good motion one. Or express her opinion. I wanted to hear from other colleagues as conservator or the bloc. What do they think about the deadline? If we could reach an agreement and all the committee agreed upon, I believe it will be for the best of all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Alkuri. Mr. Barcelona-Vel.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. We have talked about this motion quite a bit. Mr. Backrack has presented his arguments, and I'm pretty much in agreement with them. It's a topic that requires, more than a meeting, and I don't think that, the minister would refuse. We're talking about end of March. It's not as if we're talking about next week or in a few days. I think that the motion is reasonable, and I think we should proceed with the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Barcelona-Vel. Mr. Fillmore, just for clarification, are you putting the amendment forward? You're on mute.
Yes, I'm putting that amendment forward.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Now, we do have an amendment. Mr. Clerk, if you want to read the amendment so we can vote on that, then I'll go to the main motion as it would be or not be amended.
Right. Okay. Well, my understanding was that the amendment would be to remove all of the text after the words second hour. So the motion would just end there. And
is that correct, Mr. Fillmore? That's how you'd like to see it?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions or comments further to that? With none, Mr. Clerk, if you want to go ahead with the vote.
So the question is on the amendment. Mr. Fillmore.
I vote against.
The amendment.
Your own amendment?
Yeah. I beg your pardon. I'm very fond of my own amendment, and I would vote in favor of that one. Yeah, thank you.
Too late.
Mr. Alkuri.
In favor.
Ms. Jacek.
In favor.
Mr. Rogers.
In favor.
Mr. Sidhu.
In favor, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Cram.
I vote against the amendment.
Ms. Kusi.
Opposed.
Mr. Scheer.
Against.
Mr. Soroka.
Against the amendment.
Mr. Barcelona-Vel.
Contre.
And Mr. Backrack.
I'm against.
6-5. The amendment fails.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Back to the main motion without an amendment attached to it. Members, Any questions or comments to that? With none, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Fillmore.
Well, my bluff has been called, and I'll vote in favor of the motion.
Monsieur El Khoury.
In favor.
Ms. Jessic.
In favor.
Mr. Rogers.
In favor.
Mr. Sidhu.
In favor.
Mr. Cram.
In favor.
Ms. Kusi.
To Mr. Fillmore, I'll say, as the former vice chair of PROC, there's never any harm in trying. I'm in favor. Thank you.
Mr. Scheer.
In favor.
Mr. Soroka.
In favor.
Monsieur Barcelou Duval.
Oh.
And Mr. Backrack.
I'm in favor of the motion.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Mr. Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Backrack. We're now going to go back to Mr. Backrack for questions to the witnesses. Mr. Backrack, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the committee members for discussing that motion. I really appreciate it. To Professor Whiteside, and my apologies as well to the witnesses for the little sidetrack there. To Professor Whiteside, something you mentioned in your introductory remarks around this idea of reversing the procurement process. I believe those were your words, but some comments that the CEO of the Canada Infrastructure Bank had made along those lines. I come from the municipal sector. I also represent a very rural region of Canada made up of very small communities. And I'm wondering, when we go out and try to match the needs of private investors, is there a risk that rural communities and rural infrastructure could lose out in that situation?
Professor Whiteside.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. Well, I think there is a real risk in that rural and remote communities are really any community anywhere that is interested in the type of project that investors are not interested in. And so what is that? Well, that's a small project in terms of capital costs, a project that is very risky, as we heard about. I mean, one of the selling points for the P3 community with the CIB is that it would take risk away. I mean, that's an absolute dream for an investor, is to not actually have to bear any of the risk and to profit from it. And rural and remote communities just might not have the kinds of infrastructure needs, other than probably broadband, that the CIB seems interested in targeting. Well, okay, actually, other than a few things. I mean, retrofits, of course, kind of promoting a green infrastructure shift generally, but maybe things like LRTs are not quite so important for rural and remote communities. Maybe things that they need are like community center upgrades, or other kinds of like community theater projects, small water upgrades, this kind of thing. Things that probably the CIB and most likely private investors would not be eager to get their hands on, because they aren't necessarily commercializable, or they aren't necessarily profitable.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Mr. Backrack. We're now going to move on to Mr. Soroka for 5 minutes. Mr. Soroka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the presenters today. I have my first question to Ms. Van Buren. Now, you had mentioned in your discussions at the start that we need to build the investor confidence, but under the bank, because there is basically almost a guarantee that the investors can't lose any money, how do you mean that they need to build confidence with investors in these projects?
Ms. Van Buren.
Thank you for the question. Investor confidence speaks to our country as a whole and how procurement and projects happen. So when there's a lot of red tape, when we see projects that think they have a green light and then other things get in the way, whether that's regulatory process that is not as crisp as we thought. These are all barriers to how procurement can flow. And of course, that impacts investor confidence. And of course, as I said in my earlier comments, Canada is a global trading country. And so we need to make sure that investors, not just within Canada, but investors who are interested in Canada, stay interested because we're competing on a global stage.
Mr. Soroka?
Okay, Ms. Bull, you haven't had a question yet, so I'll put my questions to you. Besides the one project with the power line and the internet, have you had any other Indigenous communities applying or getting funding or looking at applications for these projects for P3s or not?
Ms. Bull?
Thank you. So there is one other project that CIB has is in their list, and that's an Oneida solar storage project. That's a partnership with Enerstore for battery storage. From our perspective, we definitely see a number of other Indigenous communities that have projects that are ready and in need of infrastructure spending. There are actually 40 shovel-ready projects in First Nation communities across Canada. And we've seen success here in Ontario in projects where we've seen investment and partnerships between Indigenous communities and corporations. And we see a number of corporations that are our members at CCAB that are looking to work and invest with communities.
Roca?
So, Mr. Chair, back to Ms. Bull again. Do you think that under this bank that we're actually going to get the investment from private sector into these communities, or is there possibly a better way to fund some of these infrastructure deficits within the communities?
Ms. Bull?
So I do think if we look at these two projects already and Enerstore's investment and their focus on being able to work with community, particularly in green energy in remote and rural communities, particularly those that are still reliant on diesel generation, there is a real interest in private investment to work with those communities to get off of the diesel reliance.
Mr. Soroka?
Well, that's good to hear, because that was one of my concerns, whether or not this is going to be effective or helpful to these communities, because there has been such lack of infrastructure put into them, and especially in the last couple of years with water and that. So do you think that you'll be able to address the water problems within these communities through the bank or not?
Ms. Bull?
Well, my hope is that the government's commitment to address the water project will happen across the country with communities on its own. But we know that the bank is looking specifically at revenue generating projects in communities, which number of communities have those from a ferry, as an example, or from toll roads, as we know that as climate change is impacting the length of the winter road season, that has definitely impacted communities. And there is an investment opportunity for toll roads and rail projects. I think also as we look at any infrastructure project that's crossing treaty lands and crossing First Nation land, private investment is going to need to figure out how to work and partner with those communities.
Mr. Soroka?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bull, for those answers. Ms. Van Buren, a part of the projects that they're developing, you need to have either an art project or part of it or some daycare. How do you feel about that as a capital project or a P3 project, that they have to have some of these in there? Do you feel that's part of the infrastructure or not?
Ms. Van Buren?
Thank you for the question. The community benefits piece of it is certainly aspirational. We believe that infrastructure spending or infrastructure investment already generates significant benefits to the communities, whether that's the clean water, the care, the education. Unrelated social aspirations should come out of a separate funding. So infrastructure should be for infrastructure, and those other things which are fantastic, whether it's daycare or art programs, whatever it happens to be, should come out of the appropriate spending budget and not out of infrastructure.
Thank you, Ms. Van Buren, and thank you, Mr. Soroka. We're now going to move on to Mr. Rogers of the Liberal Party. Mr. Rogers, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our guests today for their presentations and the information they've been providing to us. I'm going to direct this question to Ms. Van Buren. Our government is committed to supporting good projects across the country, and really that creates good union jobs and social benefits, while at the same time, reducing environmental impacts. And in fact, Minister McKenna last week spoke to this group and talked about thousands of projects she's approved in just under a year, more than the Conservatives approved in 4 years. As our government remains focused on building back better, Can you please update members on the state of the construction industry across the country during these unprecedented times, and how we can support more Canadians to get back to work? Ms. Van Buren?
Ms. Van Buren?
Thank you very much for the question. In the early days in the pandemic, the industry collaborated in an unprecedented word, to say the buzzword of the year, and shared health protocols. In fact, they were used as an example of what other sectors could use. And we demonstrated that we could continue to work safely by prioritizing not only our workers, but their families and communities. So we're very appreciative of being an essential service, but we delivered on that and we have a good track record. We do have a shortage of skilled workers. We have a campaign called Talents Fits Here, and we are actively trying to reposition the industry as a career of choice. There's been, talk in the media about a she session, and our industry can offer great jobs to women. Who are mainly over-indexed in the service industry and under-indexed in construction. So that's what we want to do. We want to work with the federal government to attract women, young women, all kinds of women, and other underrepresented segments to get those good-paying jobs and to have those consistent jobs. And that's certainly, I think, an eye-opener for many people when they've seen construction continue to work and to deliver on the amazing infrastructure that's needed for our country.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Ms. Van Buren. I'm so pleased to hear your comments related to females and in the construction industry and the contribution they can make. The next question I'd like to direct to Mr. Romoff. We know that broadband infrastructure is no longer just a nice thing to have. Canadians, especially during this pandemic period, are increasingly dependent on working from home and learning remotely and need access to reliable broadband. So while broadband projects create immediate jobs and economic activity, the key here is that Canadians now don't have access to important sectors of the economy that can only be delivered virtually or digitally. Can P3s help to address the needs across the country to have reliable networks where they can work and learn?
Mr. Romoff?
Romoff?
That's a great question. Thank you very much for that. The answer is absolutely yes. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's a P3 approach or another procurement model. The reality is that there is clearly a need now for connectivity around the country. First and foremost, obviously, to enable a session like we're having today, there's no doubt about that. But also, when you think about remote communities, the access issues around education and health, just to name two, would be hugely improved through putting in place the IT infrastructure in order to make that happen. You may be aware of a project, again, in the Northwest Territories, where a couple of years ago, they laid fiber right up the Mackenzie Valley. And that was a huge step in the right direction to enable that kind of connectivity. That did come to market as a P3 and was a very successful project. And there are many projects, by the way, in the United States where they're using a P3 approach for broadband. And we are seeing, without a doubt, interest by the federal government and a number of provincial governments to put this infrastructure in place. What I would say, too, is there's another dimension to this. As Canada continues to try to attract talent from around the world, if we can't put in place a broadly based 5G network, we're not going to attract young people from around the world to come to Canada and only have access to a 1G network, right? So there's so many dimensions to this issue around broadband or putting in place the fiber that's necessary to take Canada back up as a country that's well connected, and in a country of our size geographically, we are the poster child for that kind of need. So without a doubt, we in the council are very strong supporters of rolling out a significant broadband initiative, and where it makes sense to do it using a P3 model, terrific. And in other instances, there are other ways to do it, but I think you've put your finger on a really critical infrastructure need in Canada, and I know that governments are turning their mind to this now.
Thank you, Mr. Romoff, and thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you so much.
We're now going to move on to Mr. Shipley. And in our third round, Mr. Shipley, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Unfortunately, Mr. Shipley is not with us today. Let me see. Mr. Scheer, were you?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Mr. Scheer, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I just would be remiss since Mr. Mr. El-Khoury tried to make an untrue assertion. Let me assure the witnesses and any other Canadians that are listening or watching that the Conservatives have always had a strong record of supporting infrastructure projects. Unlike this Liberal government, we've actually been able to get the job done. And as we've heard from witnesses, both in this meeting and in previous meetings, this current government is lapsing an awful lot of money. I think I've heard stats is up to 40% in some fiscal years have been lapsed. And that means that these projects aren't getting spent. And one of the reasons why we're conducting this study is because we're trying to figure out why the infrastructure bank is just completely unable to get anything built. And I know some of you here today, and as we've heard in other meetings, are willing to give the bank the benefit of the doubt. This is now I think we're under the third big rejig of the infrastructure bank after such an awful start. I think Ms. Van Buren characterized the infrastructure bank as off to a slow start. Well, 0 projects in 4 years would certainly be considered a slow start by anybody's method of calculation. And so when you look at the types of things that it was supposed to do and its complete inability to get it done, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is where is this mythical private sector investment? When the Prime Minister promised, when he announced this bank, it wasn't just a pilot project. It wasn't just a discussion paper or an initiative within a department. It was a signature piece. This was a hallmark of how well connected the Prime Minister was, and after going off to international conferences, hobnobbing with the uber elite, like this, we're talking like billionaires, the 1% of the 1%, comes back to Canada and he promises us this great tale, this almost like a fairy tale. You might expect this to be an Aesop fable or a Brothers Grimm type of story where we're going to put some magic beans into this bank and these massive beanstalks would grow with private sector money. And one of the things we're trying to figure out is where is it all? So maybe I'll direct my question to Mr. Romoff, because you're from an institute that specializes in this. We heard a witness in the previous meeting talk about how rather than unlocking private sector investment, it seems that with the current structure that they've now adopted, it's actually crowding out private sector money. So in your analysis, why is it that in a model where the government was going to guarantee profits to private sector investors, to large multinational corporations, and take on the risk for Canadian taxpayers, how come we're not seeing more private sector investors willing to have skin in the game, willing to put ownership dollars in these projects? Because that's the measure of success for the infrastructure bank was 2x, 4x, even 7x, 7 times the private sector investment for every dollar of public money. So far, the only example we have is in the project in Montreal, where it's a pension fund that has been committed. But in all these other projects, we're just not seeing that private sector money. So, do you have any guess or explanation as to why that might be?
Mr. Romoff.
Thank you for those comments and that question. I would say that the institutional investors and private equity in Canada are hungry to participate in projects around the country. And as you may know, with respect to the Champlain Bridge in Montreal, there is significant investment in that project. Was
that under the bank, though? Was that under the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, the Champlain Bridge?
No, it was not. What I'm saying is that the investment community is keenly interested. And as the right kinds of projects come to the bank for consideration, I think you'll see that interest is there. I'll give you another example. For instance, you heard from Mr. Bain a couple of days ago from Concert Infrastructure. They are significant players in the infrastructure space, and their investors are the pension funds from around the country. So they are investing in these projects. And I think, as Mr. Bain said, when the right project comes to the bank, his investors will be keenly interested. The same thing is the case with respect to Fengate. Fengate Capital, you may be aware that they manage a good portion of Labor's International's pension fund, and they are looking again for projects. What intrigues me at the moment about the infrastructure bank is, as you may be aware, they now have a mandate for unsolicited proposals, and they have just announced their unsolicited proposals framework. And I think there's real opportunity now for the private sector to identify the kinds of projects that will be of interest to the bank and work with the bank. And in doing that, if these projects can go ahead, they will inevitably bring their private finance players with them to the equation. And you want private finance in these projects because you need that community to have skin in the game, because that's what really ensures that projects that are procured irrespective of the model deliver on their contractual obligations, because it's the financiers that are at risk and their funding that's at risk. So I'm optimistic that as the bank moves ahead with both its growth plan, I'm particularly interested in the Indigenous project portfolio they'll develop. I made reference a little bit earlier to the Tlicho All Seasons Road project in the Northwest Territories. That's a significant project where there is a 20% cash equity infusion coming from Indigenous communities. So the interest is there, the capacity to make those kinds of investments is there, and I think as projects come
it's
to the
not
fore,
happening. But for
Thank,
4
thank
years,
you, thank you, Mr. Romoff. Thank you, Mr. Scheer. We'll now move on to our next speaker, Mr. Fillmore. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start by saying I'm fairly certain that everyone in this meeting, witnesses and committee members alike, understand that infrastructure is the key to accelerating economies and is the key to repairing damaged economies. In fact, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, which took the United States out of the Great Depression of the 1930s. In fact, our own government has been involved in a $180 billion New Deal for the last several years. We've been investing in communities across the country. However, with the advent of COVID, with the well-known infrastructure gap articulated by FCM, among other groups, articulated by Ms. Bull this evening to be around $500 billion, depending on how you measure it. With the need to connect the country by broadband, with the need to fight a climate war, and with the overwhelming need to invest more in Indigenous communities, certainly now is the time that we need to be doing more to invest in communities. So what we've been doing really so far, what governments tend to do is to leverage, federal tax dollars to get more provincial tax dollars and more municipal tax dollars. But I think we, again, on this call, all understand there's really only one taxpayer. So the beauty of the CIB is that we can then use that taxpayers' dollars to leverage private capital, which is of course the whole intention of the CIB. So understanding that, I wonder, Ms. Bull, if you could share with us how you see the impact of private sector capital in First Nations communities, on reserve, in remote communities, to achieve the things that need to be achieved in those communities.
Ms. Bull.
Thank you for the question. I think I want to highlight the project that Mr. Romoff has spoken about. There are a number of projects where Indigenous communities have some equity that they could be able to invest within their community, in an opportunity also to bring revenue back into their community, and it provides a chance for them to partner, to participate, and determine the outcomes of their community instead of the years in which we've been in place where our future has being determined and planned for us. So if we look at Indigenous communities who potentially have partnered on other projects, they do have a revenue stream and an equity that they want to be able to invest back into the infrastructure in their community. But if we look at the commitment that governments in the past and through the Constitution have made to communities, there is a role and a responsibility of government to play in that role. And I think, as I've said before, there are private investment corporations and private investors who believe in reconciliation in this community and understand the benefit and the effect that it can have when you have infrastructure, when you can have clean water and green energy and clean houses and energy efficient houses, um, and when you can participate in the economy through broadband and run your business. The opportunity to unlock economic development within those communities and support business development in those communities is going to go back to support the GDP across Canada and Canada's economy. I think the impact in some of that investment is well known, and the benefits are yet to really fully be realized.
Mr. Fillmore?
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Bell. I'm very grateful for that. I'd like to ask the same question of Mr. Haley, but through the climate lens, through the climate action lens. What can we do with this private capital to advance this climate war that we're in?
Mr. Haley?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, you talked about the New Deal, and what I think the CIB can do for building retrofits is very similar to what you saw in those post-war years of the role of public investments creating new markets for, say, residential mortgages or rural electrification. Essentially, public investment led. It did things that the private sector saw as being too risky, but it led more through demonstration, right? It took it on and then it demonstrated that this is actually a market, right? This is actually a market where private investment is safe, and it created those initial market structures, right? So that things like standardization, things like aggregation of projects that essentially created the right institutions for private sector capital to come in. So I do think that's a bit different than kind of just waiting for projects to come from the private sector. Again, the CIB needs to sort of have this market creating mission, which I'm encouraged by, the new growth brand taking on building retrofits as a new area.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have another 30 seconds or are we done?
No, that's it. Mr. Fillmore, thank you for your intervention, as well as Mr. Haley. And unfortunately, members, that is it for this meeting. We're at 5:30 and we are no longer able to move on. So with that, I do want to thank and give full appreciation to all the witnesses that came out today. It was a very in-depth conversation, and to the members, great questions. I think, as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, that triple bottom line, I think Ms. Van Buren mentioned it, that triple bottom line when it comes to economy, environment, and social aspects and the lens that we're looking through, were very much brought forward today with respect to most questions, if not all questions. And I thank and congratulate all members and witnesses for that, because it really will give us a lot of information for that report to come back to committee. So with that, once again, thank you. Have a great evening, and we'll see you all on Thursday. I adjourn.
Thank you, Mr.